Hi Prashant, lovely to have you here.
Hi, Anirudh.
The voice of the Gen Z podcast. You've been such a truly amazing partner to clients over the last couple of months. It's an honor to have you over here. This episode is going to be about our collaboration between Zingbus, the bus transportation company, leading the charge for a more sustainable future, with clients, our climate finance company that's actually enabling the money that our planetary revival needs to flow from where it is to where it needs to go. So Prashant, would love to actually just start with, the conception of Zingbus. When did it happen? What was the reason for it? And then leading into, how do you imagine a more sustainable future? And what's Zingbus's role in making that happen too?
Yeah, thanks for having me. The feeling of elation is mutual. So coming to the origin of Zingbus, the best way to characterize it would be that average Indian travels using buses. There is no other medium that he or she can look upon, for the mere reason that these railways and buses are the only means of transportation. If you can pay less, if you can't pay more than 2 rupees per kilometer, right? If you talk about flights, they are like about 7-8 rupees per kilometer. If you talk about rental cabs or something of that genre, or even a owned vehicle, right, it is like about that 6-7 rupees per kilometer. So within 2 rupees per kilometer, where 98% of the Indians relate to or lie, right, we only have Indian Railways and the buses. Now, Indian Railways has been struggling with capacity crunch since I have known them, right? So the past 20 years, that has not changed, and that gives me the reason to believe that the next 20 years are not going to be different for Indian Railways, at least. And I believe at some level our government and authorities will also have related to that, and that is why in the last 10 years, if you see, they have quadrupled the investment that they started making into the highway infrastructure, which gives us the cue that the private sector needs to take over. They'll give us an infrastructure and we need to put more buses on it. So that is more or less the origin thought. Of course, when we go a little bit deeper into how the space is currently structured, we would understand that the market is heavily unorganized, right? There are multiple woes that a customer faces, and technology has made a very small dent in the entire space, and a lot needs to be done. And that is where Zingbus comes into picture. We say that फर्क नहीं पड़ता where are you booking your ticket from, right? If you're booking a Zingbus, आपको XYZ kind of experiences traveled. You will get these many amenities. Your buses will not be late. If they are late, you'll get notifications beforehand, right? And so that you can plan your journey better. We need to understand that all of this lower to upper middle class has evolved from a railway user into a Zingbus user. So they don't really mind waiting for a means of locomotion. I feel bad even saying that, but that's what the truth is, right? They don't mind waiting for their transport to arrive, jab tak ki you are proactively communicating to them about, right? So I would definitely mind waiting with my family at a curbside location at 10 p.m. in the night. But if you have told me that आपको 30 minutes late से आना है, I would probably not have minded that much, right? So that's what the key is. So effective communication is what technology's forte is, right? So using technology, we have been able to communicate the bus's arrival, anything that is related with the trip in a more proactive fashion. Apart from that, it also allows us to make sure that the trips run in a manner which is intended, and every time that a person travels with us, he or she gets a unique kind of experience which is related to the Zingbus brand, and that is what Zingbus is all about. Coming back to the latter part of your question, how I see sustainability maturing over the next couple of decades, I believe a sustainable future is something that all of us should share. This effectively means that we'll get to that future only and only if all of us kind of lend our hands into it, right? And clients is a beautiful concept with that thought process कि आप जर्नी कर रहे हो यार, आप कुछ भी काम कर रहे हो, राइट? मैं मान लो if I'm say consuming a burger, right? I need to be very conscious of what the creation and my consumption of that burger has yielded the climate, right? Has yielded the global, this beautiful ecosystem that we have been inherited, right? And I need to make some effort. It could be financial in nature, it could be non-financial, it could be tangible, it could be intangible in nature, but I need to make some effort to neutralize that. And यहाँ से शुरुआत है to give our listeners some purview how it happens with the partnership of clients and zingbus is that when you go to a zingbus platform to book a ticket, right, you need to part away with a few bucks that the platform will tell you, which would be sufficient enough to neutralize the carbon that your journey would have otherwise released into the ecosystem, right? You pay that gets collected via zingbus. Zingbus transfers it to clients who then invest into various projects which allows that particular effect to take result into that particular effect.
Thanks a lot. What a wonderful articulation of one, zingbus's conception, evolution, and then the partnership that you have with clients as well. There was one point that you brought up in between which I really liked, which was about effective communication, to the consumer, to a rider of a zingbus. Effective communication is such an important value because at its root core, it's about respecting the consumer, right? The problem is we've gotten used to as a population.
Chalta hai wala hisab.
Chalta hai, right? Not getting respected enough by the brands we buy from. And the second a brand starts actually caring and saying, hey, I want to treat you better, I will communicate with you, your wait time. I'll communicate with you the experience that you actually deserve. People actually like that.
Yeah.
Because it's a step above what we've already been used to. Right. And tech enables that. Tech is a lever to make that happen, to deliver far better experiences and really just respect people and give more dignity. Right?
True. That's what any kind of technology solves for. It removes information asymmetry from the transaction. And as long as you are able to do that effectively, both the parties of that transaction neither of the parties of that transaction would feel grudged in, right? They would understand things like this. So in case of zingbus, right, our buses move for more than 700 kilometers in a day, right? And through different states, different cities, different tolls, different state borders, etc., etc., etc. इनमें से कहीं भी जाम हो सकता है, right? There is a traffic nuisance created. There is something that authorities, suppose you are coming out of Goa, there would be the narco test that would, right? There would be testing for, there would be searching for narcos and liquor of that kind. That takes time, right? And the public understands that. The travelers understand that. As long as when they are asking why is the bus standing here for past 30 minutes, they get an effective reply. And we have not limited it to the crew's role, right? You can chat on zingbus customer support 24/7, and every trip and the person who is behind that chat is enabled enough to give you effective details which would very effectively solve your query. And that is what zingbus means by respecting their customer.
Wonderful. So transparency and effective communication are core values that zingbus has embraced.
Of course.
Right? And you're seeing the difference in providing this to consumers. You're seeing the difference in their behavior toward your brand as well.
Of course. So the last year, so we are a brand which got seeded and created during the COVID, right? One of the worst things that could happen for the transportation industry, right? People were afraid to travel. But the way that people came back and accepted it wholeheartedly, right? The way people communicated amongst each other, like what zingbus stands for and how was their experience with zingbus compared to an XYZ Anirudh Travels or a Prashant Travels, right? That actually led us to grow multifold, during which other bus operators, the legacy bus operators, were kind of struggling, right? While others were struggling to even make half of their fleet active, we grew about 15x in the same time period. We are rated almost, NPS currently stands at about 63-64% on a weekly fashion. And if you were to look at the ratings that customer gives us on one of the most popular online ticketing websites, right, we are rated 4.3 out of 5. The average rating for a bus operator there is 3.1, right? All of the largest legacy players, if you were to talk about Orange Travels or VRL Travels, Nita Travels, brands that we have kind of heard up growing, right? All of them are rated like 3.5, 3.6, 3.7. So there is definitely some delta of difference in the consumer experience that has been created using the technology and the products that we have created. And that has actually allowed us, that has actually led us to fulfill more than 3 million rides in the past 3.5 years, right? And on a monthly basis, we are clocking about 3 lakh rides, and we are growing about 10% month over month. We connect, and this is something that I'd like to boast about as well, right? Pardon my arrogance over here. But on any given day, zingbus picks and drops passengers from more than 200 unique cities across the country, right? This count for a brand like Indigo is just 71. So आप Indigo से 71 destinations across the country को fly कर सकते हो. Of course the scale is different. Of course that would be different, right? It's a 16-year-old brand. Indigo is a 16-year-old brand. We are just 3.5 years, right? But the sheer scale of the coverage that we have had, right, it allows us to kind of map the entire country pin code by pin code, and that too of the effectiveness level, wherein we are picking and dropping passengers for more than 200 cities. On a monthly fashion, we pick about from 300 cities, right? And these are small tier 2, tier 3 cities where the consumer would probably be accustomed only to zingbus if we were to characterize us as a mobility brand. But these guys do not know about Ola, these guys do not know about Rapido, these guys do not know about Make My Trip. All they know about is zingbus.
And I can attest to that expansion because I live in Delhi, and I feel like with more and more frequency I've been seeing zingbuses on the road. And you wouldn't believe it, but every time I do, I kind of like shout out of the window, saying go Zingbus, because obviously we're always happy to see, Gen Z brands, what we call generation climate brands, who actually started caring and are champions for our climate too. And it's wonderful that you can build a sustainable business with your business model that's also consumer first, where consumers have love for it, and it's sustainable for the planet, right? And that entire PPP, with the profit, purpose, planet combination is really what the future lies in. We need brands to step up and say it's not just individual people's job. It's not just a government job. It's also our job to enable a sustainable future. So are there any brands that in your, formative years, you really admired for embracing that model really well, that you have looked up to, you've been inspired by, and somewhere Zingbus has also taken values?
I think Indigo is a great brand to look upon, right? They made an average Indian travel, and that is what is powerful about that. Sorry, an average Indian fly, right? Travel to har roz hota hai, but they made an average Indian fly, right? It was impossible before they rolled up their sleeves and kind of connected all of the India together, deployed multiple fleet on these connections, and made the entire ecosystem more affordable for the Indian masses. आज भी वो कुछ 2-2.5 लाख लोग travel using Indigo on a daily basis. हम लोग महीने में उतने लोगों को travel करवाते हैं. तो of course there is no comparison, but they actually would have played a huge role in the coming of age of Indian ecosystem, I would say, right, or Indian economy, I would say. That's a brand that I have really loved, right. I also resonate with the thought that I think brands can do more for their ESG responsibilities, and they should, right? Because, and not only environmental, I think in general for CSR kind of activities also need not be mandated by the government itself, right? And I think, and that is why I resonate with clients that much, because it's बहुत ही simple कर दिया आपने. It's very simple. पहले क्या mindset होता था कि suppose I am taking $1,000 out of a customer for a particular service. If I have to invest it in any green or tech project, or I have to basically invest it into a societal project or a CSR activity, that buck is going out of my pocket, right? What we have done very beautifully is that भाई 1,000 रुपए के ऊपर 10 रुपया और कस्टमर पे कर रहा है, और ये उसकी विलिंगनेस है that this gets basically invested alpha beta जगह पे, right? इसके पहले if you would have remember, all of us would have purchased those classmate notebooks in our school days, right? उसमें पीछे लिखा हुआ होता था for every 3 notebooks that you purchase, ITC donates ₹5 or ₹1 or whatever, right, to feeding of malnourished children, or to basically making education affordable for people in children in rural areas. वो still was like, मतलब आप 3 खरीदोगे तो उसमें से ₹1 जा रहा है. That was still not direct. It was a very indirect nudge. ये direct है. And I was really happy to see that more than 2/3 of our customers. So clients is an optional tick. So automatically ticked होता है. But it's an optional tick. If the customer decides not to pay for it, they can choose not to pay for it, right? But still, more than 2/3 of the consumers opt for paying that certain amount because they feel responsible for their planet Earth. They feel responsible for the ecosystem, and that's a very welcoming thought. And I feel if more people were to basically deploy the same strategy. Suppose I am drinking a coffee, as I gave you the burger example, right? अगर burger pay कर रहा हूँ वहाँ पे मैं ₹3 pay करके, if I can neutralize the entire effect of what I was imparting into the ecosystem as a consumer, that would be great, and I think a lot of people would be game for it.
It's a wonderful thought. In fact, when we were starting clients, the core, contrarian idea we had was people actually care a lot more than we believed. Individual people care a lot, but we really don't have a fair idea where to begin, right? The first sustainable or climate positive choice you make can't be to go and get a solar rooftop or buy an electric car. Those are very big decisions. Yeah. So how about making it fast, simpler and easier, and then actually becoming like a barometer, to see do people care or not? In your everyday transaction, just become available and then observe, right? And in your case, like at zingbus checkout, like you rightly said, it's been about 2/3 consistently over the last 6 months. That's incredible.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
People genuinely care a lot. And I think that is only taking more and more shape in Indian society. And it's not just upper middle class or middle class or, anything, any spectrum economically. It's pan-economic spectrum, pan-ethnic spectrum, pan-age spectrum. And this is what we're kind of calling generation climate. It's not Gen X, Y, Z, it's generation climate. 5-year-old, 35-year-old, 85-year-old who's starting to care. And they're telling the brands that they buy from, listen, I'm ready. Why don't you do your bit and give me a choice also, and I'll be happy to support you, right? And actually continue to give you patronage. So how do you extend that behavior? Now, you're identifying people who are saying, we care, we're ready, take us on this climate journey with you. Now what more? So offering carbon neutrality is one thing. What else does zingbus have planned on the sustainable journey?
I believe picking up a public transport journey in itself was at some stage motivated by making an impact for the climate overall. Because even if you use railways, right, the amount of carbon that you generate is almost 250% of what you would do if you were basically traveling using a IC engine bus. And you can literally not compare from the amount that you would have generated if you were basically doing it for if you're doing that particular journey using your own car or cab or even flight, right? Apart from that, what we did is that we increased the number of kilometers that a single asset was running for, right? So on an average in India, about 350, a bus runs for about 350, 400 kilometers in a day, which is almost half of what the same buses run in the States or in the European countries, right? So there the buses run for more than 700 kilometers in a day. By designing the network in a more efficient manner, by creating routes which were longer in length and were connecting more cities, and thus the number of people who were using that same bus in a single day was higher, it allowed us to basically do the same number of trips and serve the same number of customers using less buses. That means that
higher asset utilization. Right?
Higher asset utilization basically, right? Higher utilization basically led to less carbon getting generated at an overall level. Secondly, of course, electric buses are the future, right? That is undisputed. But I believe that it requires a certain amount of more evolvement from an economic standpoint and from a capacity standpoint for them to become kind of mainstream. And we are on top of that. We are effectively discussing partnerships with multiple OEMs on a daily level to basically be the spearhead of that revolution in India. So network utilization is one thing. So utilizing the asset more, of course, definitely helps. And then electric is definitely the future. And our goal is to basically grow the Nexus that much in the span of next 2-3 years that we would be able to effectively deploy more electric fleet and make it more economic viable. I'll tell you how that kind of works, because say if I were to deploy a certain number of electric vehicles on a particular corridor, I would require charging stations at the beginning of that corridor, at the end of that corridor, and if it's a longer corridor, probably in the middle also. And the investment that is required to make these charging stations can become feasible only if you run a certain number of buses daily, right? And for any other bus operator, it's literally impossible to make sure that on that particular certain corridor, they are able to give that much demand so that the cost of that particular charging station is recovered. So it kind of passes on the baton to aggregators like ourselves to basically make sure that this particular stretch would have 30-40 vehicles who would getting their energy from that particular fuel station on a daily basis, right? And this is where I believe that we would be playing a pivotal role into the shift that would happen in the next 5-6 years. Apart from government, I don't think anyone else in the country has the ability to demonstrate such a level of commitment towards electrification of the entire ecosystem. So that's definitely there.
100% agree with you on that. And you use the right term, it's tip of the spear. So big change is created when there's enough demand created.
Yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm. And over here, we can have the full stack of electric, mobility built with the batteries, with the battery swapping stations, with the materials, with e-waste recycling, battery recycling, all of it. But if there's not enough demand that's actually using those electric fleets, none of it will ever really commercially materialize, right?
I think demand would be not very much concerned about what kind of vehicle we are running, right? So there are electric buses which are still being run, very few, right? There are certain corridors like Mumbai, Pune, Delhi, Chandigarh, on which few people have already deployed electric buses. And intra-city में तो है ही सब जगह पे, right? Even in Patna, there are electric buses which are being run by Bihar State Transport Corporation, right? Now, I do not see that the customer is more willing to onboard an electric bus. Of course, there is an initial infatuation with a new product, but that kinds of wears down very quickly. The customer is concerned about getting from point A to point B. It becomes the responsibility of the service providers to make it more attractive for the customer.
Absolutely. That's why I think the demand creation over here is not B2C. It's B2B2C. Yeah. So actually the aggregator like, Zingbus or a BlueSmart is responsible for, finding the model that makes sense economically to absorb enough of a fleet and then creating attraction and demand in your users to say, hey, not only will this get you from point A to B, this also happens to be better for the environment. Right?
Of course.
And the repercussion of doing that is so many-fold. I know as a BlueSmart rider now, right? And have the amount of recommended it to other friends of mine also. One, it's cleaner. Two, it comes on time. Three, it's an introduction of electric vehicles to people who may not have otherwise sat in an electric car. Right?
Of course.
And in doing that, you're actually creating mind share and you're creating demand for that particular product to be utilized in that moment, right? That's incredibly powerful.
Right.
So, the tip of the spear example that you used, bringing electric buses in the future into people's imagination and then people's lives, right? It's not because they're demanding it. It's because it just makes sense for you to do and then you're introducing it to them and delivering a better experience, right? And that's, I think, how the big transition happens in society.
Yes, completely. I 100% agree with that. So customers should be more than willing to accept this change, right? What we have to, as service providers, do is that make sure that their interests are protected while we make that shift, because nothing will happen on their own. And I believe, of course, the policymakers also have a responsibility over here. And in line with Mr. Narendra Modi's vision of 2030, right? I believe the policymakers would be benefited towards that particular goal if they were to make policies which are more favorable for electric fleet, irrespective of the form factor, irrespective of whether it's cars or two-wheelers or larger assets.
And policy is such an important part of creating a more sustainable future. There's this wonderful analogy I heard recently that some countries specialize and their most creative minds go into policy creation.
Yeah.
So they actually create enabling policy and then entrepreneurs and technologists play catch up to deliver the products to fill in that policy, right? Europe is a big example of that.
Right.
In the US, they have a slightly different model, which is the entrepreneurs are the ones innovating and then policymakers are playing catch up. In India, it's actually a mix, right? In a bunch of sectors, it's entrepreneurs innovating, policymakers playing catch up to curtail. But then there's other cases where the policymakers are actually very, very creative, right?
Look for UPI as an example, right? Look for UPI as an example.
Exactly.
UPI as a product is so powerful and is like something that India has done at a scale which is unimaginable for the largest global superpowers also.
It's the most advanced fintech solution with the most accessibility.
Right. UPI is the backbone of so many financial products that we use on a daily basis. So in that area, I think the policymakers are leaps and bounds ahead of what the ecosystem
Absolutely.
needs, and they're very futuristic in their thought process.
And it's very wonderful when that happens, like with our FAME policy for electric vehicles. Policy preceded people's demand, right? With the biofuel policy in India too, to an extent.
Right.
It's policy that actually laid the grounds for more and more ethanol blending and biofuel blending.
Correct.
And now the manufacturers are playing catch up, right?
Right.
So it's the fact that we have that capability as a nation, and we have creative minds, leading the charge, and then entrepreneurs like us are playing catch up.
Right.
I just hope that happens more and more and more.
And all of that while we are still a developing economy, because a developing economy has very different kind of needs compared to a particular household, right? for a family of limited means to basically start investing into activities which are not only for their futuristic welfare but also for the welfare of the community as a whole, right? Is right. जब आप अपने bread butter jam से जूझ रहे होते हो, right? उस समय it's very difficult to think about society as a whole. So I think in that regard, India as a nation is probably creating the playbook of how other developing nations should contribute to the entire economy and the efforts being made towards the betterment of our society and planet.
So you think we're evolving into respecting shared resources more?
Yeah, definitely.
Because we, as an individual and as a species, have always we've believed in community, but for the private, right? That's anytime we have a chance, we extend our balconies a little bit more than we should.
Right, that's a very humorous thought. I think, yeah. But I believe that definitely happens on a smaller level, right? But I don't think so. We as humans evolved only when we started living together and sharing things, right? If we would have not done that, the civilization would not have been where it is right now. We started settling together. We basically understood the role of camaraderie, right? Which is not present in most of the animal kingdom, and that is why we are on the top. I think that's as a basic instinct was always there, but it was kind of suppressed by short-term thinking and trivial goals that every individual and household had, like extending their balconies.
Yeah. Where did the name zingbus come from? Like, what was the origin story for that?
कुछ नहीं है. It
happened to be.
It just happened.
It's got a nice zing to it.
So right, it is. Right, we are lucky that it just crossed our mind. I think it's excellent branding. Right, it has success written all over it. It has
and great colors, by the way. Not at all biased.
Right.
Not at all biased about this, but
so we have tried to be inclusive from very beginning. That differentiates us from all the other players that are there. Right, we have even from the very beginning, we have had a healthy share of tier 2 and tier 3 kind of routes. It was always the goal that a single bus should connect to as many cities as possible instead of just deploying assets on more profitable kind of connections. Right? It was always the thought that we have to create an impact, and by the virtue of doing that, we'll create a brand, and that brand will eventually lead to our success instead of just focusing on short-term thinking of deploying buses on connections which were popular.
Love that thought too. Impact first and then build a brand around that and then deliver for customer love. Right?
Yeah.
And the combination of that is really what builds a generational company in the future.
I certainly, we at zingbus and the founding team at zingbus definitely believe so. And I believe that is one of the factors which has led to basically us growing and thriving during the past 3 years. Right? Otherwise, a lot of mobility companies have shut shop during the same period.
Yeah. And look, now that we're coming out of the COVID years and people are a lot more sensitized to one, traveling less, and two, with things like COP27 happening and more climate change awareness happening, that sense of responsibility of, okay, should I really consume? Should I really travel? Should I really do that extra trip? Right? How is that kind of playing out for you, and how does zingbus see its role within that transition happening? People will always keep consuming, will always keep traveling, but with the less consumption, less traveling, how do you, what is your role to play in that transition?
I think it was a short-term shift that happened, Anirudh, honestly. I don't think that, I at my core believe that traveling is very essential to human existence. लोग क्यों travel करते हैं? Let's come back to that. Why do people travel? People travel to increase the sphere of their societal and economic well-being. That is what they do. एक गांव में मान लो there is a family, right, who does agriculture and अपने fields पे ही रहते हैं. They have zero need for travel, right? But at the time that say one of their sons or daughters got some education, they'll have to go out of that village and basically education लेने के लिए भी, then livelihood earn करने के लिए, कुछ expertise gain करने के लिए, they'll have to travel. They'll have to travel to learn. They'll have to travel to meet people, relatives from the same family end up settling in different parts of the world. Right? I would not really cherish and be fond of a world where we only meet via screen time, right? That's not the way that humans have evolved, and I would not definitely have it, right? So I believe travel is very core to our existence, although it's a part of a consumption strata that we have, but I believe traveling gives back more to the world than it consumes.
I have this interesting little, metric for thinking about nations and nations that actually get wealthy over time. I think there's three things. So you can tell a nation's wealth and the quality of life for people by one, the amount of power that they have, right? On an individual level. So per capita power consumption, per capita power accessibility. Right. Second one is protein. And how much protein do you actually have access to in your life? And through what different forms. That's why I'm really excited for the alternative protein industry to take shape and really like enable more protein access to far more sections of society.
Yeah.
The third one I think is mobility, right? Per capita mobility. Your ability to move from one place to another enables choices and freedom, right? So those three are really the functions for a nation's wealth and an individual's well-being.
It's sort of when you think about it, all of the things that you mentioned are basic human rights, right? If you have made basically locomotion, if a society had made locomotion that much costly that an average consumer cannot afford it, right? It's definitely a sign of distress. Same goes about protein consumption. Same goes about basic power requirements, right? So रोटी कपड़ा मकान के बाद ये तीनों ही आने चाहिए मेरे हिसाब से, logically speaking.
Absolutely. And just to get to the end of our conversation today, we've talked a lot about zingbus as a company, zingbus's role in the climate fight. When you look at society at large, do you think the primary responsibility falls onto individuals, onto governments, onto consumer brands, or financial institutions? If you had to look at these four large stakeholders in society, who's the main responsibility on, and who are you betting on to do it?
Those are two different questions actually. One is whose responsibility it is, and the second would be whom I am betting on. Right?
Yes.
I'm definitely betting on entrepreneurs like you and myself, right? Who would not only educate the customer about it, but also create seamless functions in which a person or a consumer who is willing to contribute or is willing to fight back can do so with minimum friction in the entire system. Effort तो उसके end से तो लगेगा ही, चाहे वो economic हो या non-economic हो, effort तो उस बंदे को डालना ही पड़ेगा. But all we can do is basically lube the entire system well so that he does not have enough friction into it. And secondly, I think we'll have to, in this regard, I would definitely think that we'll have to handhold the policymakers to accommodate the needs of Gen Z, as you rightly mentioned, right, into the policies that they create, and into making sure that those policies are implemented in every state, in every department, right? So that someone who is taking a charge of building for the climate does not have to basically suffer any kind of red tapeism. This, I believe, is what would happen. Of course, the responsibility is shared both by individuals, institutions, and the government. The largest responsibility, I believe, lies with the people, right? That is where the largest responsibility lies, because only what I have seen in the past, say 30 years of my existence, right, or past 20 years of my cognitive existence, right, is that whatever people have actually seem to want is what gets delivered eventually, right? So if the equality based on gender was not a priority, we would not have seen that shift happening in the last 20-25 years, right? So if a better climate, a more responsible consumerism is not what people want, there isn't enough force in the world and technology in the world that can basically make that happen. But the good part is that with the educational background that all of us have had, right, that is something that the policymakers did, right, and they did it beautifully, right. Climate ka role हम लोगों ने पढ़ा बचपन में. Environmental science was a subject which was introduced when I was
EVS and EVE, I remember both.
Right. I was in class 6th when it got introduced in the ICSE board, and class 8th when it got introduced into the CBSE board, right? But I think उस education के, by the virtue of that education, we automatically feel more responsible. That is not the case with the generation before us, right? They are now feeling responsible because we are telling them to feel responsible. Because now the communication around everything is in that manner that ग्रीन कचरा अलग रखो, ये कचरा अलग रखो, राइट? वो सारी चीजें उनको अब समझ में आनी स्टार्ट हुई हैं. बट हमारे लिए तो दिस वाज अ पार्ट ऑफ आवर डीएनए. इट वाज, वी वर जस्ट वेटिंग फॉर अ प्रोडक्ट लाइक योर्स टू से कि हाँ आपने जो सीखा उसको यहाँ यूटिलाइज करो, राइट? एंड ऑफ कोर्स मतलब इट्स द वेरी बेसिक बिगिनिंग ऑफ व्हाट क्लाइंट्स कुड डू. देयर आर एन नंबर ऑफ थिंग्स दैट यू कैन डू मोर, एंड यू विल.
And you use again that acronym DNA, right? It was embedded in us when we were growing up from school, from our society, from our community. It was already in the DNA. Yeah. And that's actually now starting to get practiced with the brands that we are building. I think that's the really, really cool part, right? Sustainability in the DNA. In fact, this is the coin we use at Climbs a lot. And I heard you use the phrase in your interview with Forbes, with Hari, right?
Yeah.
Sustainability in the DNA of brands is what will enable easy accessibility, right? Like the looped accessibility to people to be able to do it very, like in their normal lives.
Correct.
And that's why I think brands are a really big part of this effort. If we expect
they'll eventually come around, Anirudh. I think they'll eventually come around, right? All we need is a seamless ecosystem of how it will get integrated with our brand, which you are building, and people asking for it more, right? And that will take time. Good things take time to get built, right? And I think once that system is in place and there is enough seeded audience who have either used it or heard about it, right, and have seen the contribution that they have made into practice, right, like the projects that you are in turn investing into, the results that they would eventually bring in, or just the visual aspect of what would have changed in that particular landscape, right? Once that is shared with the people who have contributed towards it, it would immediately go viral. And I think more and more brands would want to get associated with such an initiative and not the other way around.
Absolutely, and it's starting to happen, like you said. You know, we have 15 wonderful brands from around the country today who are partners, like zingbus, Make My Trip, Tamarind Chutney, Slurp Farm, Neiman's. There's a bunch of amazing companies that are getting on board and have taken that Gen Z fight. To the ones that are yet to come, parting thoughts, if they have any hesitancy, what would you tell them? Where can they, how should they begin?
I'll tell them just to try it out, right? Don't make decisions on behalf of your customer. Just try it out. You'll be surprised with what your customer tells you.
Absolutely. Love that thought. Prashant, thanks so much for being with us today on the Voice of the Gen Z podcast. It's been a lovely conversation, super engaging, particularly because of how deep we went into consumer behavior, right? This is a consumer behavior problem more than anything else.
All of us are strategists which are solving for consumer behaviors. I believe that's what our core philosophy is.
And we have a deep belief that people actually do care, right? And people are more inclined to do good. It's our job to make it easy for them to do good.
Yeah, of course. I think any policymaker, any entrepreneur, or any person who is who is working towards betterment of the society, they have to believe in the general goodness of the people. If they don't, then anything that they build would not last.
Totally. Wonderful conversation, Prashant.
Thanks for
Thanks so
having
much
me.
for being with us, and thank you for being a partner to clients.
You're welcome. It's a great project. And thanks for having me. It was an engaging conversation.
Thanks a lot.